racism was prevalent in the South and all across the country at this time in the late 70s, early 80s. Despite the civil rights movement, racism wasn't over. So, despite the fact that these two children turned up dead, police did not take it seriously. They didn't try to connect the two bodies to a bigger case or try to investigate it any further. And there was no real panic happening at that point. The police wrote it off as being drug related, despite the fact that these kids were spot where Williams was pulled over, and the police ended up arresting him for the death of Nathaniel Gator, as well as the death of 22-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne. So these were two adults. He was not charged for any of the children's deaths. Wayne Williams was a music promoter. He said he was looking for the next Michael Jackson, which is why investigators believe that he could have possibly been involved in the killing of the children. If they were doing some kind of audition for him, or maybe he had promised them fame or something along those lines. Williams denied any connection to any of the murders. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial. That was in 1982, that started in January. The case was built around fibers because at that time DNA was not being used. And if it was just kind of being tested. They built their case around a large number of fibers from the Williams home and car and dog hairs from the family's German Shepherd. It was a mixed breed German Shepherd. There were 19 different sources of fibers and hairs that were matched to a number of the victims. But despite presenting evidence from the other killings, Williams was only charged for the murders of Gator and Payne. Again, both of them are adults, and the trial ended on February 27th, where Williams was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. Then the investigators closed all of the cases for all of the children who were murdered or missing, attributing them to Williams. They believed that they had their guy despite the fact that he was never convicted of these murders. It's thought that the FBI and local authorities closed the case too early because they didn't have a conviction, and a lot of the cases were not investigated properly. As is classic with these high-profile type of cases, especially cases involving children. So they ended up reopening the case, I believe, a couple years ago. I think they reopened it multiple times, but the most recent reopening, they established a 15-year window of looking into children who were murdered during that time, going from 1970, I think, to 1985. So the team would review crimes that might be linked to the murders, but weren't identified as such at that time. So during that time period, 157 children were killed, including the 24 that we already knew about, but many others were the victims of domestic violence. But early on, the team that reopened the case realized that a lot of the case were not properly investigated, and that the 22 cases that were closed should have remained open. The HBO documentary ended with strong evidence that the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists belonging to the National States Rights Party may have been involved in the killings and the disappearances, which is scroll down here. Scroll down. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. Wow, lots of blank pages here. Okay. This is the preface. Walter Law of Playboy wrote me to my home in France, suggesting that I go to Atlanta to do a story concerning the missing and, as it evolved, murdered children. I had been following the story, what there was, that is, in the foreign press to follow. It is not so easy to follow a good story occurring in one's own country from the vantage point of another one. From afar, one may imagine that one perceives the pattern, and one may, but as one is not challenged, or more precisely, menaced by the details, the pattern may be nothing more than something one imagines oneself to be able to remember. And after all, what I remembered, or imagined myself to remember of my life in America, was terror. And what I'm trying to suggest by what one imagines oneself to be able to remember is that terror cannot be remembered. One blots it out. The organism, the human being, blots it out. One invents or creates a personality or a persona. Beneath this accumulation sleeps or hopes to sleep that terror which the memory repudiates. Yet it never sleeps, that terror which is not the terror of death, which cannot be imagined, but the terror of being destroyed. I do not remember, will never remember, how I howled and screamed the first time my mother was carried away from me. My mother was the only human being in the world, the only human being. Everyone else existed by her permission. Yet what the memory repudiates controls the human being. What one does not remember dictates who one loves or fails to love. What one does not remember dictates actually whether one plays poker, pool, or chess. What one does not remember contains the key to one's tantrums or one's boys. What one does not remember is the serpent in the garden of one's dreams. What one does not remember is the key to one's performance in the toilet or bed. What one does not remember contains the only hope, danger, and trap of love. Only love can help you recognize what you do not remember. And memory makes its only real appearance in this life, as this life is ending, appearing at last as a kind of guide into a condition which is far beyond memory, as it is beyond imagination. What has this to do with the murdered, missing children of Atlanta? It has something to do with the fact that no one wishes to be plunged head down into the torrent of what he does not remember and does not wish to remember. It has something to do with the fact that we all came here as candidates for the slaughter of the innocents. It has something to do with the fact that all survivors, however they accommodate or fail to remember it, bear the inexorable guilt of the survivor. It has something to do, in my own case, with having once been a black child in a white country. My memory stammers, but my soul is a witness. That's really powerful. It is one thing to be a part of the audience at the courtroom, Roman circus, and quite another matter to be in the ring. The audience is there to distract or justify itself with questions of right or wrong. The gladiators know only that one of them must win. They are not suspending judgment, they are creating judgment, ours. The circus and the audience are absolutely indispensable to the hygiene of the state. The judge that the computer selected is a young and very likable black man, Clarence Cooper. He is one of the many black legal tenants nurtured by District Attorney Lewis Slayton. Slayton is a white, native Atlantan, someone from Atlanta, and he guided the prosecution, although, according to some of the people I met, guided is not the word. Judge Cooper, the younger of two children, was born on May 5th, 1942, in Decatur, Georgia. Decatur is a suburb of Atlanta, but a suburb of Atlanta in 1942 is not at all the same entity as a suburb of Atlanta is 1982, which may be why Cooper was raised in Cincinnati. His birthplace is, in any case, ambiguous. It means that he can or cannot claim, as so many others, I'm from Atlanta, I'm not from Georgia. This claim struck me as stubborn and stunning delusion. It is as though I should claim, for example, that I'm from Harlem, I'm not from New York. The intention or the meaning of the claim is clear, but Harlem is not an independent entity or nation. It exists in and is controlled by the city and state of New York. Or, if on another level I should proclaim in Europe or in Africa to be from New York, but not from America, one would be justified in worrying about my sanity, to say nothing of my reliability. I do not mean to go so far as concerns my friends in Atlanta, but this has been their posture since we first met in 1957, and may be one of the keys, if keys there are, to the city. Atlanta is a railroad town, comes into existence, that is, around one of the triumphs of the Industrial Revolution, the railroad, and it was first called, bleakly enough, Terminus. This was in the 1830s, when the institution of slavery had a few more years left in it than it does the present century. It is inland, which is why General Sherman had to march to the sea, destroying a crucial segment of the Confederacy's transportation system. He didn't destroy great works of art or the opera because they weren't here. There was nothing here. There was probably a little more than nothing, but Atlanta's eminence was, and is, as a commercial hub, a wheeling and dealing transportation center, and one of the world's busiest and most interminable airports has taken the place of the railroads. But Atlanta's high visibility and commercial importance do not mean that Atlanta is not in the state of Georgia. This is one of the reasons, the principal reason, that during the plague years of the child murders, and then the arrest and then the trial, Atlanta's leitmotif was the presence and the responsibility of the black administration. The presence of a black administration, as distinguished perhaps from an incontestable actuality, proved that the city, too busy to hate, could not be accused of administering Southern justice. It proved nothing of the sort, not only because Atlanta belongs to the state of Georgia, but because Georgia belongs to the United States. Cooper's mother was a maid, and his father drove a truck. His father was disabled in 1966, when Cooper would have been 24. Everybody pays for it, and everybody knows it. The only way to not know it is to retreat into the Southern madness. Indeed, the inability to face this most particular and specific truth is the Southern madness. But as someone told me long ago, the spirit of the South is the spirit of America. Whoever was murdering the children then could literally have been anyone of any color, from the teacher to the preacher to the cop to the bus driver to your neighbor to you. All would or could have had the same motive, underlying the tremendous unwillingness to believe that a black person could be murdering black children was the specifically Southern knowledge and experience of how much black blood is in white veins and how much white blood is in black veins. Thus, it was slowly and reluctantly decided that the murderer had to be someone dark enough to pass unnoticed in black neighborhoods, just as some of one's cousins or brothers or sisters or nieces or nephews had been light enough to pass as white. Some of the children have been shot, some stabbed, some strangled, some are naked, some are clothed, some are decomposing. You don't know all of them, but you know some. The last time you saw this one or that one, he was in the kitchen with your child. You begin waiting for your child to come home. Under the best of circumstances and the most accommodating of places, it is impossible to keep an adolescent male child at home, and the curfew in the CASPA designed to get black kids off the street before 11 never had the remotest possibility of being enforced. Boys will be boys indeed, and with a vengeance, and for many a poor boy, the most perceptible difference between the streets and home is that home is danger and squalor with a blanket and a roof, and mama, sometimes daddy, and the other kids, and the joking, incoherent, intolerable sense that he must do something. And no young person has ever heard a warning. Ain't nobody going to mess with me, he tells you. Believing it, of course, all children do. And then he doesn't come home. I realized after the first few days in Atlanta that I joked on. Could I not ask the general, cheerful, universal question, how are the kids? Without realizing it, one saw the answer to the unasked question in the eyes of the man or woman I was facing. I was surprised, one person told me, at the absence of the black presence at the trial. We just weren't there. It was as though we didn't want to believe that this was happening, that one of us could do this. Oh yes, said another, it means we're in the white shit now. They got us. They win. When a blacker person can do this. The black man who had been tried for 2 murders and for the moment condemned as a mass murderer of black children is an odd creature, but so would you or I be, sitting on the witness stand under such an aura. He is not, literally or legally, accused of being a mass murderer, but he is the only suspect, and he is assumed to be a mass murderer. Once under suspicion, and so dreadful a suspicion, everything the person does is intolerably suspect, beginning, perhaps, with this intolerable assumption that he has any right to be born. It is much, much simpler, after all, and more considerate for the accused to agree at once to be guilty. With this agreement, we are released from the ordeal of imposing or suspending judgment. This creature, trapped at bay, looks towards us as his only hope, and we are his only hope. Beneath the microscope of the Inquisition, everything this creature does, smiling or not smiling, calm or panic-stricken, belching or not belching, sweating or not sweating, smoking or not smoking, shouting or not shouting, is suspect. This is because